Hi everybody, Mike Pfeiffer. Back in the Buick Riviera, 98 Riviera. On the way back from Albuquerque, we started having an issue with it not going into overdrive. I took it to a dealer, $3,600 for a rebuilt transmission installation at the dealer. I don't want to spend that on a $3,000 car, but I had them do some diagnosis, and it was a pressure problem. They wanted $1,700 to put a pressure switch in the transmission, so being as I had most of the tools, I decided to do the job myself and put in all 4 of the solenoids, and there's a small pressure sensor plate that goes in there, as well as a problem that they talked about on YouTube with many of the 4T65E GM transmissions, and that is the splines on the end of the 4th gear or overdrive shaft wearing out. Anyway, I didn't videotape any of it. It took me 2.5 days to do it because I had no idea where to start disconnecting things and so forth. But I'm going to just go over what I had to do to get the transmission down to work on it. It's not going to be very visual. However, I will tell you what you need to remove and what you need to do. And I hope it helps somebody if you have to do it on a Riviera. I don't know whether other Buicks share this. I'll tell you the mistakes I made. And we'll go from there. But anyway, I hope this helps somebody if you have this problem on a Buick Riviera or a vehicle with a similar frame design. So let's get into it. Okay, the first kind of mistake I made, because I didn't look in the engine compartment before I decided to go to Harbor Freight and buy that engine support, which is not a bad tool, by the way. It's a pretty nice tool. Got it at 20% off. It was like 50 some bucks. Thought I could use it in here to support the engine and use my jack to drop the subframe. However, let me show you why that didn't, well, it did work for me, but I'll explain why it worked and show you why it didn't work like it was supposed to work. Okay, that engine support is supposed to set in the fender groove here where fenders normally bolt onto a vehicle. There is no groove on this car. There is no place to put the engine support. The fender wraps over the edge and bolts on the inside. Anyways, I was able to put the one end of the engine support here, and the engine connection, or the eyelet to support the engine is here, and there's one on the back corner back over there. So I put the, let me get back here. I put the support diagonally across here. This is plastic on top but metal underneath here, so it was plenty strong. I didn't know what was underneath where the windshield wiper is here, so I wound up taking off the windshield wiper blades, taking off this piece of plastic, and I actually, there's some openings underneath here. I would have just crushed this piece of plastic. So I took it off, put a 2x4 here, and set the other end of that support on the 2x4. And the tool actually worked very well. However, in retrospect, and if I was going to do it again, I would use 2 jacks, one under the engine and one underneath the subframe. It's easier with 2 jacks than it is the support, in my opinion. So that's the direction I would go if I was going to do it again. Okay, the first thing that needs to be done, and this, I'm going to try and speed this up because I don't want this to be an overly long video. But the first thing, if you're going to do any kind of work on the engine such as this, you need to disconnect the negative connection of the battery. And the battery is under the back seat on the Riviera. I don't know where it is on everything else, Buick-wise. But anyway, that's the first thing you do. The next thing I did, or that I would recommend that you do, and I'm not going to take this cover off of here, but these 3 fuel tubes that you see coming from the back here, one goes to there's one that's goes to some kind of a pressure, I don't know, something over here, and then 2 other ones go up to the fuel rail, and those all 3 really need to be disconnected, because if you break one of those hard plastic tubes, I understand that it's quite a job to replace all of that. You have to replace all that tubing all the way back, or you have to figure out how to modify it with some kind of rubber tubing or something. And I'm sure that probably can be done, but that's out of my realm of expertise. Okay, the next thing, of course, you got to remove is the rubber to the air box, and I removed the top here, this box, those 3 fuel lines. I took off this hose, which goes over the top of the engine and connects to engine vacuum for the power brakes. I disconnected and removed those 2 bolts on the shift mechanism. I popped the shift mechanism off right back there. I did not disconnect the, you don't need to disconnect the exhaust system. The next thing I did was disconnect these 3 bolts, there, and take this whole motor mount off altogether from the frame. When you loosen these, this bracket comes loose. You do not need to do anything with this bracket. These hoses are long enough to go down when you drop the engine down. Let's see. And I don't think I can get underneath to show you, but let me see if I can get the camera over here. Right, and I'm not sure we can see it. Right about there underneath, there's another motor mount on the subframe. There's 4 bolts there. You will need to remove those 4 bolts as well, and that would be the next thing I would do. Now let's go to the other side of the engine. Okay, this is the right-hand motor mount. You would need to take this bolt out, loosen this nut right here, and you'd have to probably put a jack underneath the engine and jack it up and down and get some support under the engine before you take this one out. And you'll have to take some pressure off it to get that bolt out of there. You'll have to push it out with a punch once you get this off. You know, raise it up and down, take the weight off it, push that bolt out. Once you get that bolt out, the weight is pretty much going to be on the jack, okay? So you're going to be sitting on the jack at that point. Let me see what else I can tell you here from this area. You do not have to take off any of the radiator hoses. You don't really have to take off anything else. Don't have to disconnect anything else from the engine itself, which was surprising to me that there was that much slack and everything. Now let's go down and kind of take a look in the wheel well. I am not going to be able to get in there very well, but let's look. Okay, this looks pretty oily under here, and it's because of all the fluid that I drained out of it and that leaks out of it while you're working on it. Where do I start here? There is a motor mount. You can see these 2 bolts right here. You can take those 2 bolts out, or nuts off rather, there, and that allows the engine to be free of the entire subframe. What I did, and there's 3 bolts, and I'm not going to bother showing you. You've got to take this plastic off, this plastic panel off right here. When you get the wheel off, you got to take both wheels off. Each wheel on each side has to be off. I placed jack stands just on the end of the frame. There's a jacking point if you look at the bottom of underneath the door up towards the front of the wheel well. I put a jack stand at each one of those points, actually forward of each one of those points as far as I could get. I might also mention another thing. Let me stop this real quick before I get too into this wheel well deal here. Okay, here I am laying on my driveway, where you just saw me. My driveway slopes here. My garage is not wide enough to do this kind of work in, and I didn't want all this fluid and everything in the garage. And we need to use the garage for business. But anyway, I have some, and I don't know, I can't get a picture of them right now. But anyway, I have some plastic ramps. And it doesn't matter what kind of ramps they are, but if you have ramps, and I was doing it on the driveway, so I backed the car back up on the ramps on the driveway to try and level out the car, which worked well. And I put the jack stands right about in this location right here, up underneath the frame there. There's a jack point, and I just did it just ahead of the jack point. So anyways, now let's back up here. After you get this plastic off, and after you get both the wheels off, the left and right wheels, and you get it up on the jack stands, you've got to take the inner fender well out, which is all held in by a bunch of these cheap-ass plastic clips, which everybody uses now. Once you get that done, you get all this plastic out of here, you'll pretty much be able to see what you're doing. At that point, I believe what I did is on the other side over there, I loosened up, there is 3 subframe bolts. I loosened them up. You have about 4 inches of thread, and I loosened them up about 2 inches worth, all 3 of them, with the cars, and let the subframe come down that couple inches or so. Then I came over to this side, and at that point, what we had to do is we had to remove the bottom of the strut here. Let me get the camera back. Oops, sorry about that. Sorry about that too. We had to remove the lower ball joint from the strut. That strut will remain pretty much in position. Got to take that nut off the top of the sway bar, loosen up the 2 bolts that hold that end of the sway bar. You don't have to take them all the way off. Once you do that, I don't know, I did it wrong, but what you need to do is there's a large nut on the end of the axle out here. I forget what the metric value of that nut is, but it's large. Had to go buy a 3/4 inch drive wrench and the appropriate socket to get that bolt off. You of course take the brake caliper off. You have to hang it somewhere in the wheel well. Let's see, aside from that, once you get that nut off the end of the axle, I sprayed it with WD-40 and let it sit for about 30 minutes. Came back, gave it a couple of good whacks with a hammer, and it freed it up to where I could see that it would actually move. And when I say whack it with a hammer, always be sure and put the nut on the end of the threads, and then put a board or something on there and whack it on the board. Never whack the metal itself. You'll booger up the threads and you'll never get the axle nut back on and wind up having to replace the shaft. I took off the tie rod, the end of the tie rod over there. Once you do that, and I can't get a good picture in here, hold on. Back way, let me see if I can get my stinking finger. Okay, gang, once again, sorry I hit the button, the record button. Anyway, you need to pry out back there with a pry bar on that casting there. It's pretty heavy duty casting. I would be as gentle as I can to get it out of there. But anyway, the axle is just captured in between there and the nut on the outside. So there's no clip or anything that has to be removed or anything. But anyway, pull the axle out. Okay? And then once the axle is pulled out and the end of the strut is hanging free, and you've got the axle out of the way, pretty much most of the stuff you'll be able to see is pretty much out of the way by that point in time. Let me go up on top and show you what you need to do at that point. Okay, at that point, we're going to take these 3 bolts out right here, and you're going to hang on, take 2 of them out, hang on to the strut, take the last bolt out, and lay your strut out to the side, and that would be put back in after. That gets the strut all the way out of your way and opens up the whole wheel well so you can see what you're doing. And let me go back down on the bottom. Okay, at this point, with this off right here, you can see the subframe goes up here. There's a bolt right about here on the subframe. Same on the other side. You're gonna put a jack under the subframe. You've got a jack under the engine. You've got a jack under the subframe, and you're gonna take this bolt out, and there is 2. Let me see if I can get back there. There is one here, and there is one in that big hole right there. And it's the same on the other side. You're going to take those out, and you're going to drop this subframe down. And I dropped it down to a onto a 2x4 and just let it sit on the ground. And I don't really know how far I had the car up in the air. By the way, if I back up right here, I had the jack stand right here. The jacking point is here. I had the jack stand here. I found that I needed to move them forward because the balance of the car is really off, especially when you have the back end of the car up on some ramps, and with the weight of the engine, this is a balance point on the car, so I needed to move it forward because if I was going to screw around with the front of the car, because it seemed to want it, I didn't teeter, but it, you know, looked like the back end was light. Anyway, I'm looking underneath. Whatever you do, do not take off those two bolts to that motor mount. Take them off. Take the 4 off that I showed you on the back of the engine. Do not take those out because you cannot get to the nuts that hold those on, as well as the nuts that hold these two on, because they're blocked by some fuel line or something that's bolted to the top of the subframe. Anyway, at this point you can lower that subframe down and you can do all the work that you need to do on the engine. There's plenty of other videos out there on YouTube of how to take the side cover off the transmission. My purpose of this is, and I feel badly that I didn't do it while I was working on the car, video it while I was working on the car, but I'm trying to cover all the bases here and let you know what you got to take off, because it took me a while to figure out what to take off on this particular car. Impalas are different, Pontiacs are different, everything's got a little bit different bolt arrangements and so forth, so I'm just letting you know on a Riviera what needs to be removed and what needs to be done. Like I say, did not need to remove the exhaust or anything. It went right down with the engine, so that's not a problem. Okay, let me think of what else I need to tell you, and let me get back up on top. One other thing I'll tell you here, and I didn't see this on any of the videos that I watched about taking this cover off. This is the transmission cover that you're trying to access when you lower the engine, because the side of the frame is right here. Anyway, as you can see, when I got a Sharpie, and when I took these bolts out, all the bolts are the same with the exception of these studs, and why they put studs there I have no idea. But anyway, I marked everyone where a stud went, and of course so that when I put it back together the bolts were in the right place. Another thing that you'll have to disconnect, of course, is this is the transmission control cable that goes to the wiring loom inside of the cover that goes to all the solenoids. You can reuse, I mean 99% of the time I would assume you can reuse this gasket. It's a reusable gasket, so there's no need to buy one. Another couple of tips I would give you is on the inside, and I'll post a couple pictures here. I think I have them on the other camera. I took pictures of where everything plugged in and how the shift detent connected. Another thing you'll need to do, and it's on a couple of the videos that you'll probably find out there, when I took all the bolts out of the valve body, be sure and download a sheet that tells you, well, I've downloaded a sheet and I don't have it handy, but there's a sheet out there that has the valve body bolts listed on it, and you'll be able to find it if you Google it up. I put a piece of tape and marked each one of those individual bolts, because you'll find that almost every bolt in that inside that valve body is a different length and different size. And so I wanted to make sure I marked them so that they would go back in the proper locations. That's just another tip. And taking the valve body off, to replace solenoids you don't have to take the valve body off, but to replace the 4th gear shaft, which seems to be a problem with some of these transmissions, you will have to take the valve body off. And putting the clutches and everything back on are on all the other videos, so I'm not going to go over that. I will show you a picture of my shaft that I took out here and explain to you what happens. Let's try that. Okay, this is the 4th gear shaft within the transmission. There's a clutch pack that goes on here. This is actually the outside, or that you'll be looking at. This, you'll be looking in at it this way, and this just basically pulls out. You'll see it in the other videos. There's no sense in me going over and over and over that. But if I get really close here, you can see how the thickness of these splines has been affected when this goes in and out. Eventually what happens here, and this one's not too bad, but eventually what happens here is it strips all these off. So while I had that end off, I went ahead and had purchased a new shaft, this shaft with a hardened end on it, and went ahead and put it in there. Led me to a lot of grief putting things back together, but I won't go into that. It's really not as bad as it appears, and it is as easy as the guys in the videos who have done it several times say it is. The transmissions are all the same in the Impalas, and I mean, for the most part. If it is a 4T65E, the guts are just about all the same. So anyway, that's the shaft. And now I'll just kind of go over what I did to put it back together. Okay, pretty much putting it back together is just a reverse operation of everything that I have told you about. Actually, what I did first is raise the engine back up and got the motor mount on this end and this motor mount reconnected. That suspends the engine up there without the subframe. Then I raised up the subframe, put all my pieces back on, my strut, my ball joints ends, got all the sway bar connected back up, tightened down. And then what I did is I wound up going back in and putting those 3 bolts right there back in along with this pipe, and these pipes right here. And that was a little bit of a booger. It didn't want to fit too good, and you've got to jack the engine up and down to rotate it back and forth to get that bolt through the frame and that bolt through this part of the motor mount. That was a little bit tough. Then what I did is I went underneath and put the 4 bolts back in the one that's on the back. And if you're underneath the car, I can't get under there, but if you're underneath the car, that will be very evident to you. You will see it bolted to the where it bolts to the engine. Once I got all 4 of the engine mounts on, I went ahead and raised the subframe back up. Well, I had to raise the subframe back up to get this motor mount on, but anyway, you get the idea. It was basically just hooking stuff back up. Like I say, getting the axle back in there was not a problem. Tightening up the nut on the end of the axle, putting the brake back on, putting the caliper back on, hooking these fuel lines back in. By the way, you need there's a little plastic special tool, and most guys that have worked on any new cars know what they are to get fuel lines on and off if you've ever taken a modern fuel filter on and off. It's basically just a little piece of plastic with a slit in it that you put over the tubing, and you slide it to compress some compression tangs that allow you to pull the fuel line off, and that's basically what is up there. You needed that, but if you've done any work on modern cars, you probably have one of those. And just be sure you put back everything that you took off. I mean, it's pretty evident that the fuel lines needed to go back on, the power brake tube right there. It's just little stuff, and of course in my case, since I disassembled all this crap up here, I had to put all that stuff back on, but I would not do that again. As I said, I would use 2 jacks. I don't know what else to say about it. If I had to do it again, instead of taking, well, there were several things that held me up, like going and buying tools and that kind of junk. But if I had to do it again, it would probably only take me a half a day or maybe 3/4 of a day to drop it down again and take that cover off of there. Now that I've done it once, because I know what needs to be done. That's why I'm trying to do this video, so that if you have to do it on a Riviera, you'll know what to do. And if you got any questions, shoot me an email or put something here in the post. I know this was kind of like a quick and kind of crappy in that it's not super explanatory visually, but I hope it helps somebody. Okay, the only other thing I might add is that I am no transmission expert, and I am no certified mechanic. I did go to automotive school years and years ago, and I tackled this job. I did get all the parts in there. I don't have any transmission leaks. I don't have anything. However, the transmission needs to apparently relearn your driving technique. These computers in the modern cars are learning computers, and I would assume that when I had a defective solenoid in there, that the computer was trying to compensate for that all the time, and it doesn't know not to compensate for that now until you train it not to know that. So the car has been driving fine, but it had a couple little surging issues, and I am told, and I have read, that it may need to have the PCU flashed by the dealer, or I looked online and there's supposedly a mechanical scenario that you can go through that retrains it to the new driving style, or retrains it. I don't know. I'm going to try it anyway. It seems like the car has been doing fine. If you have a problem, you may look into that. So for today, that's about it. Okay, everybody, like I said, I know it's not a professional video, and it's really not probably as helpful as it could be, but I thought it might save somebody with this type of car some time. I hope you guys like it, and without going on and rambling more, I really appreciate you guys taking a look at it and commenting. Take care, and have a good day.